What if the most dangerous move in modern royal history didn't come from a throne, a speech, or a coronation, but from silence? Not the kind of silence that hides things. The kind that signals something has already begun. Because when Princess and the royal who never leaks, never postures, never seeks attention, is suddenly mentioned in connection with a legal probe, the question isn't, is something wrong? The question is, how bad does it have to be for her to step in? For years, royal scandals followed a familiar rhythm. A headline explodes. Social media chooses sides. Statements are issued. Then the cycle moves on. But this story doesn't follow that pattern. It didn't erupt loudly. It didn't arrive with a flashy announcement. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It crept in quietly, through legal language, through subtle shifts in media tone, through absences that spoke louder than appearances. And at the center of it all sits a name that was once synonymous with reinvention, empowerment, and modern royalty, now increasingly paired with a very different word: scrutiny. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you heard Princess Anne's name attached to controversy? Exactly. She is the royal who outlasts storms by never entering them. The one who does the work while others give speeches. The one insiders describe with a single word: institutional. So why now? Why Archewell? Why Meghan Markle? Why legal action? And why at this exact moment? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why are whispers of a confirmed divorce no longer being dismissed as tabloid fantasy? This is not a story about gossip. It's a story about pressure, about systems closing ranks, about what happens when personal narratives collide with institutional reality. And it begins with a charity. On paper, Archewell was supposed to be the answer. A foundation built on compassion, impact, and forward-thinking ideals. A bridge between celebrity influence and meaningful change. For supporters, it symbolized purpose beyond palaces. For critics, it raised questions from day one. But questions don't become probes overnight. They accumulate. They wait. They mature in silence. Charities exist in a fragile space. They rely on trust more than profit. Once that trust is questioned, the damage doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps. Donors hesitate. Regulators observe. Advisors document. And somewhere behind closed doors, someone asks the question no brand once asked. Does this hold up under scrutiny? Now add royalty to that equation. Not the glamorous kind. Not the Netflix kind. The kind bound by precedent, law, and reputation stretching back centuries. This is where the story shifts. Because according to multiple reports and insider commentary, concerns surrounding Archewell didn't just stay in media circles. They moved into legal territory. And once that happens, personalities no longer matter. Intentions no longer matter. Narratives no longer matter. Only documentation does. And that's where Princess Anne enters the conversation. Not as a headline seeker, not as a public accuser, but as a symbol. A signal that this isn't being treated as entertainment. It's being treated as governance. Ask yourself, why would the royal family risk reigniting Sussex tensions unless they felt compelled? Unless something crossed from embarrassing into unacceptable. At the same time, another pressure point emerged. Meghan Markle, once defined by control over her narrative, found herself responding rather than directing. Lawsuits don't care about brand strategy. Courts don't respond to op-eds. And legal filings don't bend for sympathy. When someone is sued, the story stops being hypothetical. It becomes procedural. Deadlines, disclosures, consequences. And while public attention fixated on individual headlines, something else was happening beneath the surface, something even more destabilizing. The marriage. For years, divorce rumors hovered around Harry and Meghan like background noise. Easy clicks, predictable speculation, almost boring in their repetition. But recently, something changed. The language changed. Commentators stopped asking if and started asking how. Insiders stopped denying and started deflecting. Brand watchers noticed subtle separations where unity once existed. Appearances without explanations. Projects without joint messaging. Silences where reassurances used to be. Is that confirmation? Not officially. But in royal history, confirmation rarely arrives in a press release. It arrives in behavior. And behavior, lately, has been speaking volumes. Harry, the prince who once told the world everything, has gone quiet. Not reflective quiet. Strategic quiet. The kind that suggests legal counsel, not emotional processing. Meghan, once always 2 steps ahead of the media cycle, now appears to be reacting rather than leading. So ask yourself, when both halves of a power couple stop controlling the narrative, who is? Because someone always is. This is where the irony deepens. The couple who left the monarchy to escape scrutiny now face scrutiny from the very systems they believe they no longer needed. Charity law doesn't care where you live. Marriage law doesn't care about public sympathy. And royal institutions, contrary to popular belief, do not forget, they wait. Patiently. Silently. This story matters now because it's not just about Meghan or Harry. It's about what happens when modern celebrity collides with ancient accountability, when branding meets bureaucracy, when emotion meets evidence. And it matters because the outcome won't just affect reputations. It could redefine how former royals operate in the public sphere going forward. Can you be half in, half out, legally, financially, morally? Or does the system eventually demand clarity? Princess Anne's involvement suggests that clarity is being demanded, not publicly, not emotionally, but methodically, behind closed doors, where reputations are weighed not by likes, but by liabilities. And that brings us to the most chilling part of this story. Because insiders suggest that what we are seeing now, the lawsuits, the silence, the shifting language around the marriage, may not be the beginning. It may be the midpoint, a recalibration phase, a tightening of focus, a moment where the institution stops reacting and starts acting. So before we go any further, ask yourself one final question. What happens when the most disciplined royal decides something has gone far enough? Because if Princess Anne is involved, this isn't about drama. It's about consequences. What makes a person like Princess Anne step into the spotlight for a story they normally would avoid? That's the first question you have to ask. For decades, she has been the royal who never chases attention. She doesn't tweet. She doesn't court headlines. She doesn't release memoirs. Her presence is measured, deliberate, and almost painfully disciplined. And yet now, her name appears at the center of a probe involving Archewell, Meghan Markle, and whispers of a Sussex divorce. It's a seismic shift, and the implications are immediate. If Anne is involved, this is no casual inquiry. This is methodical. This is institutional. This is the monarchy making a statement without ever opening its mouth. To understand why her involvement matters, we have to first understand who Princess Anne really is. She is often described as the hardest-working royal in the family, a title that doesn't just refer to appearances, speeches, or patronages. It refers to a philosophy where duty outweighs desire, where discretion outweighs drama. She has been involved in hundreds of charities, military associations, and oversight boards. Where other royals may lend a name or attend a gala, she demands accountability. She checks budgets, scrutinizes operations, and expects compliance. For Anne, work isn't performative. It is sacred. So why does it matter if Anne steps in? Because it signals that someone has crossed a threshold. Not a personal threshold, necessarily, but a systemic one. In the world of royalty, thresholds are invisible but potent. There are unspoken lines of protocol, reputation, and legality. Crossing them isn't just risky, it's existential. And according to insiders, Anne doesn't step into situations lightly. Let's consider her history. When controversies emerged around the royal family in past decades, financial missteps, public scandals, media battles, and often stayed out of the limelight. She observed. She intervened quietly. She dealt with the problem directly but privately. And that pattern is critical to understand now. Her name doesn't appear in headlines for attention. It appears in headlines when the matter is serious enough that discreet action is no longer sufficient. Now, layer in Archewell. A foundation that was built as a symbol of modernity, of influence, of meaningful impact. For a royal institution that prizes legacy, scrutiny of such a foundation is inevitable. But again, why Anne? Because the concern isn't just about the optics. It's about governance. It's about ensuring that operations, finances, and messaging align with not only the law but also the unspoken expectations of royal propriety. In short, she represents institutional authority at its sharpest and least forgiving. Ask yourself this. Why do people fear audits more than scandals? Because an audit doesn't ask for your perspective. It doesn't consider your intentions. It looks at evidence, documentation, reality, and embodies that same principle. Her scrutiny is procedural, systematic, and unwavering. If she is involved, she isn't making a statement about opinion. She is setting standards. And there's more. Princess Anne's reputation within the family is unique. She is respected across generations, across factions, across media narratives. She is one of the few royals whose judgment carries weight without being mediated by personality. Her involvement means the matter is being taken seriously not just externally, but internally. In royal terms, that is profound. It's not just another media cycle. It's a signpost that says, this is being dealt with at the highest and most discreet level. But here's the paradox. Anne rarely speaks publicly, and even when she does, her words are precise, calculated, and minimal. So why, in this instance, does her name appear at all? Because this isn't about public persuasion. It's about signaling. Signaling to the parties involved. Signaling to the institution. Signaling to the public indirectly that standards are being enforced, quietly but firmly. And this signaling can create tension. Imagine a foundation run by celebrities accustomed to controlling their narrative. Now imagine a royal, whose every decision is historically based on accountability, appearing in connection with a legal review. The collision isn't personal. It's structural. It's about authority. It's about what happens when modern fame intersects with centuries of procedural discipline. What does this mean for the public, for the media, for observers? It means the story is no longer just entertainment. It is institutional oversight in motion. It means the stakes are higher than headlines or viral videos. It means that those accustomed to managing their image now must manage compliance, documentation, and scrutiny, things far less forgiving than PR teams or celebrity advisors. And it matters not only because of Archewell. It matters because of context. The royal family is navigating a modern era where scrutiny isn't just external. It is relentless, global, and instantaneous. Decisions, actions, and affiliations are cataloged, compared, and judged in real time. In this landscape, Princess Anne's involvement is both shield and sword. It enforces standards internally while sending a clear message externally. The institution remains vigilant. Yet there's another layer here. The psychological dimension. Why would a royal, who typically avoids attention, intervene in a situation with such public resonance? Because this isn't just about charity oversight. This is about ensuring the family, the institution, and its operations maintain credibility, authority, and legitimacy. Royals, particularly senior ones, understand that perception is not just PR, perception is preservation. And for someone like Anne, the risk of letting a situation spiral without measured intervention is unacceptable. And then there is timing. The moment is not random. Legal scrutiny, public perception, media narratives, and private behavior all converge in ways that create a pressure cooker environment. When insiders mention Anne's involvement, it implies the matter has reached a critical juncture. It is no longer manageable through private advice or internal negotiation. It requires oversight, documentation, and perhaps intervention. Which brings us to the most pressing question. What does this mean for Meghan Markle, for Harry, for the Sussex narrative? When someone is accustomed to controlling the story but now finds themselves under institutional review, the game changes entirely. Every decision, every public appearance, every charitable statement, scrutinized. Every line in contracts, agreements, or filings, potentially consequential. And the irony is palpable. The couple who once stepped away from the monarchy to escape scrutiny now finds themselves subject to it in ways they cannot control. Not because the world is cruel, but because accountability, by nature, is inevitable. Systems have rules. Processes have consequences. And some actors, like Princess Anne, exist to ensure that those rules are applied impartially, even when inconvenient. Ask yourself, if this were anyone else, would it carry the same weight? Probably not. Because Anne isn't just a royal. She's an institution unto herself. Her scrutiny signals seriousness. Her involvement signals inevitability. And her silence, historically a source of calm and discretion, now becomes a harbinger of action. And here's where the tension deepens. Publicly, you might see headlines about lawsuits, divorce speculation, or or charity reviews. Privately, the situation is moving along lines most people will never see. Decisions are being made. Counsel is being consulted. Evidence is being examined. And the individuals at the center, regardless of public statements, are reacting. Reacting strategically, legally, emotionally. And that is what makes this moment different from previous royal controversies. So, the question becomes, what happens when the quietest, most disciplined royal decides something must be addressed? When tradition meets modernity, fame meets scrutiny, and narrative control meets procedural reality. The answer, insiders suggest, is rarely pretty, rarely instantaneous, but always consequential. Because when Princess acts, it is not performative. It is final. Every charity tells a story, a mission, a vision. Archewell was no different. Founded as a beacon of purpose, it was meant to merge celebrity influence with meaningful social impact. But what happens when a story is polished for the public eye, yet the documents, the filings, and the processes tell a slightly different tale? That's the question no one initially wanted to ask. At first glance, Archewell appeared flawless. Beautiful campaigns, high-profile partnerships, generous donations, public announcements dripping with hope and inspiration. It was, on paper, the charity the world expected Meghan and Harry to run. Modern, globally minded, and meticulously branded. But underneath, legal experts and insiders quietly noted small inconsistencies. Operational gaps, budget questions, messaging misalignments. Nothing explosive. Nothing anyone outside a legal team would notice immediately. But these details accumulate. They compound. And when combined with the scrutiny of someone like Princess, they are no longer small. Why does this matter? Because charities operate in a delicate ecosystem. They exist not just to do good, but to inspire trust. Every donor expects transparency. Every filing expects accuracy. Every statement can be scrutinized. And when a high-profile organization exists in the public eye, particularly one tied to royalty, the expectations double. One misstep isn't just a small error. It becomes a potential headline, a narrative point, a legal question. Inside Archewell, the pace was intense. Staff worked tirelessly to align projects with both the couple's vision and public expectations. Campaigns were meticulously crafted, down to the smallest detail. Yet, according to insiders, some corners were inevitably cut, not out of negligence, but out of pressure to deliver rapidly. Deadlines loomed. Ambitions were sky-high. And every public-facing success came with a shadow. A trail of documentation, contracts, and promises that might not perfectly align. Enter the legal probe. Suddenly, what was once internal nuance became external question. And when Princess Anne's name appeared in connection with this probe, it transformed from procedural curiosity into institutional signal. The investigation wasn't about gossip. It was about accountability. About ensuring that every financial transaction, every public statement, every partnership complied not just with charity law, but with the expectations of an institution that has survived centuries. But why Archewell? Because it is not just a charity. It is a symbol, a representation of influence, power, and reach beyond the monarchy. Any misstep there, no matter how minor, could be amplified exponentially. A minor financial discrepancy could become a narrative about trustworthiness. A missed filing deadline could become a reflection on celebrity oversight. And in a world obsessed with optics, perception can be as impactful as reality. To fully grasp the weight of this inquiry, you must understand the mechanics of charity law. Charities are legally obligated to maintain transparency. They must provide clear accounting, follow governance structures, and ensure that funds are used appropriately. Any deviation, however small, can trigger audits, fines, or even more severe legal consequences. When combined with the global spotlight on Archewell, these rules gain a heightened urgency. A procedural question becomes a headline. A minor misstep becomes a potential crisis. And yet, the public narrative was different. Media coverage, especially in tabloids, focused on speculation, emotional framing, celebrity drama. Legal nuances were glossed over. But those within the legal and royal circles saw a different picture. Small gaps, when combined with intense scrutiny, create risk. And risk is what the monarchy cannot tolerate, especially from someone perceived as acting outside the system. someone who has stepped away from traditional royal responsibilities but still operates in a space connected to the crown. Consider the pressures inside Archewell. Staff members, who had once admired the visionary approach of the Sussexes, now felt the tension of heightened oversight. Internal emails, meeting notes, and operational memos were suddenly under a new lens. Every decision made months or years prior was revisited with legal eyes. Every partnership was analyzed for compliance. And with princess and signaling attention, even seemingly minor items became consequential. But the scrutiny didn't stop at paperwork. It extended into public perception. For a foundation that relied on its reputation, perception is currency. Donors and partners take cues from leadership visibility, media framing, and institutional approval. When scrutiny appears at the highest levels, the ripple effects are immediate. Caution from collaborators, hesitation from donors. Now, imagine being Meghan Markle in this situation. A public figure who once commanded her narrative, suddenly confronted with institutional inquiry, legal letters, regulatory attention, media framing that conflates curiosity with wrongdoing, and the psychological weight of knowing that every step, every statement, every gesture is now evaluated not just publicly, but also against internal royal standards. And then there's the irony. Archewell, the organization meant to amplify positive change, suddenly becomes a focal point of controversy. The same foundation designed to showcase impact becomes a mirror reflecting scrutiny. Success becomes pressure. Visibility becomes vulnerability. And the very qualities that made it remarkable, speed, ambition, global reach, now complicate oversight. Yet, despite the growing tension, the inquiry remained silent in public discourse. No formal announcements. No press briefings. Only subtle shifts. Lawyers quietly involved. Internal reviews conducted. External advisors consulted. And the public? Unaware of the gravity behind the scenes, they saw only curated statements, inspirational posts, and smiling appearances. A dual reality emerged. One public-facing and polished, one private-facing and scrutinized. And this duality creates an emotional spike. For those observing, it becomes a story of contradictions. A charity meant to do good under the guidance of influential figures becomes a cautionary tale. A symbol of modernity becomes entangled in ancient protocols. And the more the public focuses on personalities, the more the real story, legal, procedural, and institutional, unfolds silently. So, what does this mean for the Sussexes and for the monarchy observing quietly from the shadows? It means the stakes are higher than headlines. It means every action, every campaign, every financial decision carries weight far beyond the intended mission. And it also means that institutional oversight, when invoked by someone like Princess Anne, is not negotiable. Compliance, accountability, and transparency are non-negotiable. And that is where tension escalates. Because scrutiny is rarely linear. It grows, compounds, and intersects with other pressure points, legal, emotional, and public. In the weeks following the initial quiet inquiry, several events converged: media speculation about lawsuits, internal documents being requested, and private communications hinting at shifts in strategy. Each of these elements on its own might have been manageable. Together, they created a storm. Which brings us to the mini cliffhanger. The moment where procedural questions become deeply personal and where private scrutiny begins to affect not just operations, but relationships. What seems like a legal inquiry could evolve into a narrative with consequences that reach far beyond the foundation itself. And the stage is set for events that few observers could have anticipated, including legal, financial, and emotional moves that will ripple outward in ways both public and private. What happens when celebrity, influence, and personal narrative collide with cold, unyielding legal reality? Meghan Markle, for years, controlled her story with precision. Every public appearance, every interview, every social media post was a carefully managed message. But a lawsuit doesn't care about branding. It doesn't bend to public opinion. And it certainly doesn't pause for personal preference. The first whispers of legal action began quietly. At first, they were mere hints. A filing here, an attorney's note there. Media outlets picked them up sporadically, treating them as footnotes in a larger saga. But the reality behind the headlines was far more serious. Lawsuits operate with deadlines, disclosures, and consequences that are impossible to ignore. For someone like Meghan, who is accustomed to directing the narrative, being forced into a reactive position is disorienting. Imagine opening your inbox and seeing a formal complaint filed in a jurisdiction you once considered peripheral. The tone is procedural, devoid of emotion, but the implications are immediate. Respond or risk default judgment. File counter evidence or face assumptions. Every word, every line of your communication can be used against you. And this is not speculation. This is the precise environment that legal experts describe when high-profile figures are sued. There is no room for narrative control, only legal precision. The content of the lawsuits themselves varied, touching on multiple aspects of business, branding, and personal conduct. Some concerned contractual obligations. Others involved alleged financial discrepancies or mismanaged partnerships. Each filing, carefully drafted by experienced attorneys, is designed not just to make a claim, but to establish a pattern of accountability. And when viewed collectively, these documents create a pressure cooker that even the most seasoned public figure must confront. For Meghan, the stakes were amplified by visibility. Unlike most defendants, she cannot hide. Every legal filing, every procedural motion, every court appearance has the potential to become public knowledge. Even sealed documents are often interpreted through leaks or speculation. And in a world obsessed with celebrity, legal nuance is lost in translation. The story shifts from what is legally occurring to what the public thinks is happening. Misinterpretation becomes weaponized. Meanwhile, advisors and legal teams move quickly. Every email, every contract, every partnership agreement underwent intense review. Internal memos were drafted, strategies devised, and external counsel engaged. For someone accustomed to proactive communication, this reactive mode is psychologically taxing. Decisions must be precise. Missteps carry legal risk, not just reputational risk. And every day spent responding to legal filings compounds the pressure. Consider the emotional toll. Meghan, publicly portrayed as confident and unshakable, now navigates a labyrinth of legal obligations and public speculation. Pressure mounts not just from the courts, but from the media, the public, and even allies whose loyalty is tested under scrutiny. Legal battles are rarely linear. They twist, expand, and intersect with personal relationships. What starts as a formal complaint can evolve into a narrative that questions judgment, character, and credibility. And the timing could not have been more consequential. Reports suggest that these legal filings coincided with other stressors. Internal reviews of Archewell, scrutiny from royal institutions, and growing speculation about the Sussex marriage. Each of these factors intersects with the others, creating a multifaceted pressure system. Legal, personal, and institutional pressures converge, forming a crucible that tests resilience, judgment, and strategy. The public perception layer adds another dimension. Media coverage inevitably amplifies tension. Headlines, often written for clicks rather than clarity, frame legal actions as scandal. Social media commentary escalates interpretations, often conflating allegations with conclusions. Even supporters, eager to defend, inadvertently contribute to a narrative where facts and speculation blur. In this environment, narrative control is impossible. Legal reality becomes the dominant force, reshaping the public story in ways that are unpredictable and often unfair. But there is another, deeper irony. Meghan, who once leveraged media to shape perception and influence opinion, now faces constraints imposed by the legal system. Every statement must be carefully vetted. Every interview risked jeopardizing legal positions. And in the background, Princess Anne's probe into Archewell looms, creating overlapping domains of scrutiny. Public attention is drawn to one arena, while procedural oversight silently tightens elsewhere. It's also important to recognize the psychological strategy inherent in legal action. Lawsuits are not merely about winning in court. They are about influence, leverage, and negotiation. They create obligations that must be fulfilled. They force attention, decision-making, and resource allocation. And in high-profile cases, they act as signals. To the parties involved, to institutional observers, and to the public. Every legal motion, every filing date, every response is a chess move. The court is the board, and the pieces are public perception, personal reputation, and procedural consequence. Within this complex framework, Meghan's options were limited. Every response must be precise, legally defensible, and strategically aligned. Missteps could escalate the situation. Silence could be interpreted as weakness or admission. Public statements could inadvertently jeopardize legal positions. The stakes, both procedural and personal, are enormous. And then there is the collateral impact. Legal scrutiny extends beyond the individual to the organization and relationships. Archewell, as the couple's primary vehicle, inevitably became entangled. Operations, budgets, and partnerships underwent increased scrutiny. Staff members, once inspired by the mission, faced uncertainty and pressure. Collaborators and donors, observing the emerging legal challenges, became cautious. The ripple effect of a single lawsuit reached far beyond its initial filing, affecting strategy, morale, and public perception. Yet, despite the mounting tension, the public narrative remained focused on personalities, not procedural realities. Headlines emphasized conflict, speculation, and drama. The intricacies of legal filings, procedural obligations, and institutional oversight were overshadowed by the allure of celebrity intrigue. But behind the headlines, lawyers, advisors, and institutional observers operated in a high-stakes environment where precision, timing, and compliance were paramount. Ask yourself this: what happens when the very tools used to shape narrative, media appearances, social influence, strategic communication, are neutralized by law? The answer is pressure. Relentless, inescapable, and systemic. And that pressure is exactly what Meghan faced as the legal actions intensified. The climax of this chapter lies in the intersection of law, celebrity, and institutional oversight. For Meghan, it is a moment where private strategy collides with public perception, where reactive measures replace proactive messaging, where personal resilience is tested by procedural reality. And as insiders suggest, this is precisely the moment when the stakes shifted from manageable to monumental. And that leads to the cliffhanger that bridges the next chapter. Just as legal filings forced Meghan to respond, whispers of confirmed divorce began to circulate. Private scrutiny collided with personal turmoil, and the stage was set for a public and private reckoning that no one saw coming. Divorce rumors surrounding Harry and Meghan have been circulating for years, whispered in tabloids, discussed in online forums, and speculated upon in think pieces. For a long time, these rumors were just background noise, a sort of dull hum in the larger, louder symphony of royal headlines. But recently, a subtle yet unmistakable shift occurred. What was once speculation started being treated with a weight and certainty that few expected. The language changed. From if to how. From could to is likely. And in some circles, the term confirmed began appearing, though never officially, always inferred, always cautiously phrased. Why does this matter? Because in the royal world, confirmation rarely comes through press releases. Actions, appearances, and statements, or the conspicuous absence of them, speak far louder. Observers who know the rhythms of the institution noticed something very unusual. Patterns of behavior that indicated separation, division of responsibilities, and strategic distancing. Joint appearances dwindled, previously coordinated messaging became independent, and public projects once shared began to diverge. These weren't just coincidences. They were signals, subtle yet potent, understood by those familiar with royal protocol. Consider how the public interprets these signals. Fans and critics alike read headlines, watch interviews, and scan social media for hints. But what the public rarely sees are the private cues: lawyers drafting agreements, advisors coordinating separate branding strategies, and internal documents delineating responsibilities and commitments. In this quiet space, decisions that shape not only personal futures but also public perception are made. And in this environment, the stakes are staggering. Harry and Meghan's relationship, once celebrated as a modern fairy tale, is now a subject of procedural speculation. The same individuals who once captured hearts through their narrative are now navigating a minefield where every action has ramifications. Consider the emotional complexity. Love, partnership, ambition, and family legacy all collide with legal and institutional pressures. Decisions are no longer guided purely by personal desire. They must account for media scrutiny, legal obligations, charity oversight, and the expectations of a centuries-old institution. The timing of this shift is critical. The move from rumor to confirmed comes in the midst of multiple overlapping pressures. Legal challenges facing Meghan, scrutiny of Archewell, and ongoing media attention that refuses to let any narrative remain private. Each layer compounds the next. A single misstep or poorly timed comment could exacerbate tensions and influence not just personal reputations, but public perception and institutional strategy. And then there's the role of public messaging. The Sussexes have always been savvy about narrative. Every post, every interview, every appearance has been meticulously curated. But when private signals of marital separation begin to emerge alongside legal scrutiny, controlling the narrative becomes increasingly difficult. Public appearances may appear coordinated on the surface, but behind the scenes, teams are managing the optics of distance, independence, and professionalism. It is a delicate balancing act, an art form in crisis communication. Ask yourself, how do you maintain a brand when your personal life is under both media and legal scrutiny? How do you navigate separation when every move is dissected and every gesture analyzed? And how do you remain credible when the institution you once left continues to monitor, measure, and signal its expectations? These questions don't have simple answers, and they create pressure points that few could withstand without careful management. Meanwhile, insiders suggest that this shift to confirmed is as much about signaling as it is about reality. In other words, it may not yet be legally finalized, but the behaviors, communications, and strategic moves indicate that both parties and their advisors are operating as if it were. This is a critical distinction. In royal terms, perception often carries equal weight to legal or official acknowledgement. How an action is interpreted by the public, the media, and the institution itself can have profound consequences. This shift also reflects a psychological dimension. Divorce is not merely a legal process. It is an emotional and strategic one. Decisions must balance personal feelings with public image, legal obligations, financial considerations, and institutional expectations. Every step is calculated, not just to resolve private matters, but to minimize fallout in the court of public opinion. The Sussexes, who once managed narrative with unprecedented control, now face the reality that some elements are beyond influence. External pressures, legal, institutional, and media-driven, dictate the pace and scope of action. Adding to the complexity is the interplay between the divorce signals and Archewell scrutiny. Legal review of the foundation coincides with private adjustments in personal relationships. The convergence of these pressures creates a unique environment. Personal decisions are inseparable from institutional oversight, and private emotions intersect with procedural realities. The Sussexes are operating in a high-stakes arena where every action carries amplified consequence, and every choice is scrutinized by multiple audiences. There's also an element of strategic timing to consider. In royal history, shifts from rumor to confirmation often occur not as a matter of impulse, but as a response to a confluence of events. Decisions are rarely spontaneous. They are measured, deliberate, and timed for maximum impact. The current trajectory suggests that the movement toward confirmed separation is influenced by a mix of personal necessity, legal obligation, and institutional strategy. Timing, as ever in royal affairs, is everything. The emotional component cannot be overstated. Marital separation under public and legal scrutiny exerts enormous psychological pressure. The Sussexes must navigate grief, loss, identity shifts, and public expectations simultaneously. Advisors must balance empathy with strategic caution, ensuring that emotional decisions do not compromise legal positions or public credibility. It is a high-wire act with no safety net. And then there's perception management. As the narrative shifts from rumor to confirmed separation, the role of media interpretation becomes paramount. Outlets craft stories that blur fact and speculation. Social media commentary amplifies emotion over nuance. Fans and critics alike react, often in ways that complicate legal and institutional strategy. The Sussexes must operate within this ecosystem, making strategic choices while anticipating how actions will be interpreted across multiple platforms. Finally, the shift to confirmed separation intersects with Princess Anne's involvement. Her oversight of Archewell and implied attention to procedural integrity places additional pressure on the Sussexes. Every move is observed, every decision measured, every public communication parsed for compliance and propriety. The convergence of personal, legal, and institutional oversight creates a crucible in which decisions carry far-reaching implications. And so, as the language moves from if to confirmed, a new chapter of tension begins. The rumors have ended. The speculation is no longer casual. Personal relationships, public perception, and institutional oversight converge in a high-stakes drama that is far from over. The Sussexes must navigate a labyrinth of legal, emotional, and public pressures with extraordinary care. Silence can speak louder than words. In the royal world, it often does. And in the case of Prince Harry, the shift from vocal storytelling to near-total silence has reverberated louder than any interview, op-ed, or public appearance could. For years, Harry was a prince who made headlines not just through his actions, but through the narrative he controlled. He shared personal stories, gave candid interviews, and, together with Meghan, rewrote the rules of what it meant to communicate as modern royalty. But now, silence dominates. And that silence is unsettling. Not just for the public, but for the institutions, the media, and those closest to him. Consider the change. Previously, Harry addressed controversies almost immediately. He would respond to rumors, clarify stories, and occasionally push back against perceived misrepresentations. Today, the tone is different. Appearances are measured, brief, and carefully scripted. Public statements are rare. Interviews are selective, and media engagement is minimal. The prince who once openly challenged narratives now operates with the caution of someone navigating a high-stakes legal and institutional labyrinth. Why does this matter? Because silence is a form of communication, especially in situations where words can carry liability. Every public statement now risks legal scrutiny, public misinterpretation, or exacerbation of ongoing institutional processes. In other words, silence is strategy, but it is also a signal, one that insiders and observers read carefully. A lack of comment in the midst of scrutiny sends a clear message: control has shifted. The narrative is no longer fully in his hands. The reasons for this silence are multifaceted. First, there is legal reality. Meghan's ongoing lawsuits, combined with internal investigations into Archewell, create an environment where speaking out without counsel could have severe consequences. Second, there is institutional awareness. The monarchy operates on protocols, precedents, and subtle signaling. Any deviation, especially from a high-profile former royal, could be interpreted as defiance or destabilization. And finally, there is the emotional and psychological element. Facing mounting pressure from legal, institutional, and media sources simultaneously creates a need for caution and reflection. Speaking out impulsively could inflame tensions or undermine strategy. Yet the silence is more than defensive, it is tactical. By withholding comment, Harry allows observers to interpret his absence in multiple ways, keeping the press and public guessing. Silence generates curiosity, speculation, and a sense of anticipation. And in a world where narratives are currency, this controlled quietness wields influence in a subtle but profound manner. Every absence, every unspoken word, is scrutinized for meaning, creating a pressure cooker environment where interpretation often outweighs fact. The psychological dimension of silence cannot be overstated. Harry has shifted from being a storyteller to being a subject of observation. He is now navigating a dual reality, managing private decisions while being perceived through public and institutional lenses. Each step he takes is evaluated, often harshly, by multiple audiences simultaneously. The weight of expectation, combined with the impossibility of fully controlling perception, creates intense cognitive and emotional strain. Meanwhile, Meghan's narrative control is also being tested. With lawsuits, Archewell scrutiny, and speculation about divorce, she cannot dominate the conversation as before. Harry's silence, intentional or circumstantial, compounds the tension, leaving the couple to navigate public perception and private realities separately. Their partnership, once a united front, now faces a complex dynamic where strategy, compliance, and optics must align despite the pressure of unprecedented scrutiny. Institutionally, Harry's silence serves another function. It signals deference to procedural oversight. The monarchy has long valued discretion, measured responses, and compliance with established norms. By limiting commentary, Harry minimizes friction with institutional observers while allowing legal and administrative processes to unfold. In other words, silence is both protective and strategic, balancing personal agency against the structural forces surrounding him. Yet silence is also fraught with risk. Public perception is a fickle force, and prolonged absence of explanation can lead to misunderstanding, speculation, and rumor. Fans and critics alike interpret gaps in communication according to their biases. Every unaddressed narrative can evolve, often diverging from reality. In high-profile situations, silence can be misread as weakness, complicity, or avoidance, even when it is a calculated decision grounded in prudence. And this is where tension peaks. Harry's silence coincides with escalating scrutiny of Archewell and the subtle signals of marital separation. Each pressure point amplifies the others. Legal filings demand response, institutional oversight demands compliance, and public perception demands narrative. The equilibrium that Harry and Meghan once maintained is destabilized. Every decision, even non-action, carries consequence. To fully appreciate the weight of this silence, consider its contrast with Harry's former behavior. Previously, he engaged proactively, often preempting narrative shifts with media statements or public appearances. Today, the absence of commentary speaks volumes. It communicates restraint, strategy, and perhaps acknowledgement of limitations in narrative control. It also signals to the monarchy and advisors that procedural matters must be allowed to unfold without interference, a deference to institutional authority that would have been unimaginable in earlier stages of his public life. And yet, this silence is deeply personal. Behind every absent statement is a complex mix of loyalty, pressure, and emotional strain. The prince who once candidly shared personal struggles now navigates the intersection of privacy, public expectation, and institutional oversight. Each day, without comment, carries both strategic advantage and personal cost, a delicate balance few outsiders can comprehend fully. The cliffhanger emerges naturally. Harry's silence is not just absence. It is a harbinger, a signal that pressures, both legal and institutional, are reaching a critical point. It creates anticipation, uncertainty, and tension, setting the stage for interventions, reactions, and revelations that will dramatically reshape both public and private understanding of the Sussex situation. The monarchy is not a reactive institution. It is procedural, deliberate, and disciplined. When crises arise, the response is never spontaneous or purely emotional. Every statement, every appearance, every subtle shift in messaging is calculated with precision. And in the case of the Sussex Archewell situation, insiders suggest the palace entered what many describe as a damage control mode long before public speculation escalated. Damage control in the royal context is not about admitting fault or responding to gossip. It is about managing perception, ensuring institutional stability, and mitigating risk to reputation. It operates quietly, invisibly, and often through channels that the public will never see. Advisors, legal teams, communication specialists, and senior royals coordinate to anticipate narratives, preempt misunderstandings, and maintain authority without appearing reactive. Every action, or lack thereof, is part of a broader strategy designed to protect the institution while navigating unprecedented scrutiny. For example, consider the timing of statements and appearances. When the palace issues a comment, it is rarely immediate. The delay is intentional, allowing teams to gather information, assess implications, and craft messaging that aligns with broader strategic objectives. The language chosen is carefully calibrated, precise, neutral, and often laden with subtext. Every word is weighed against precedent, institutional standards, and public perception. Even silence is measured. It is never accidental, but a strategic tool to signal patience, authority, or disapproval. In the Sussex Archewell scenario, this damage control mode took on multiple dimensions. First, there was legal oversight. Legal advisors ensured that any public statements or internal communications would not conflict with ongoing lawsuits or regulatory inquiries. Second, there was media management. Communications teams monitored coverage, assessed potential risks, and prepared responses that were subtle, indirect, and controlled. Third, there was internal coordination. Senior royals, including Princess and in her advisory capacity, reportedly played a role in ensuring that messaging and actions within the family aligned with institutional priorities. The palace operates on layers. While the public sees headlines and official statements, the real work occurs behind the scenes. Meetings with advisors, document reviews, strategic planning sessions. These are the engines of damage control. They are procedural, methodical, and rarely visible. And in high-profile cases like this, the goal is not simply to respond to the immediate crisis, but to anticipate future developments, manage cascading effects, and protect the monarchy's credibility over the long term. What makes this particular situation complex is the convergence of multiple crises. Legal scrutiny of Archewell. The subtle signals of marital separation. Media speculation amplified by social media. Each element interacts with the others, creating a pressure cooker environment where even minor missteps could have disproportionate consequences. For the palace, the challenge is maintaining stability, credibility, and authority while navigating unprecedented circumstances in the public eye. Consider the role of messaging. The monarchy rarely communicates directly about individual behavior. Instead, it relies on carefully crafted statements, spokespersons, and subtle cues to shape perception. In this case, messaging appears designed to acknowledge procedural realities without assigning blame, maintain institutional neutrality, and convey that oversight and accountability are being maintained. The language is measured, the tone disciplined, and the timing deliberate. Every release is part of a larger strategy, not a reaction to immediate events. Another aspect of damage control is coordination with other stakeholders. This includes charitable boards, legal teams, advisors, and in some instances, the broader network of royals. Alignment ensures that responses are consistent, authoritative, and strategically sound. It prevents contradictory messaging, minimizes risk, and reinforces the perception that the institution operates with control, even amid complex and high-profile challenges. But damage control also has an emotional dimension. Royals, like all humans, navigate personal feelings alongside professional obligations. In this case, tension, disappointment, and concern for family members likely coexist with the strategic imperative to maintain public composure. Balancing personal loyalty, institutional duty, and media scrutiny is a delicate, high-stakes endeavor requiring both discipline and restraint. This chapter's tension also lies in the contrast between public perception and behind-the-scenes activity. To the public, it may appear that the monarchy is reactive or distant, but internally, the situation is anything but passive. Meetings are held, documents scrutinized, contingencies planned, and messaging rehearsed. Every public appearance, statement, or absence is informed by this hidden machinery. The contrast between apparent calm and procedural intensity creates both intrigue and pressure, fueling speculation while ensuring control remains firmly with the institution. And this is where the stakes escalate. Damage control is not just about managing perception. It is about shaping outcomes. By coordinating legal oversight, internal alignment, and strategic communication, the palace ensures that any fallout from Archewell scrutiny, legal challenges, or marital speculation is contained. Every step, from minor statements to major interventions, is designed to prevent escalation, maintain authority, and reinforce institutional stability. The public rarely sees these dynamics, but the implications are profound. A misstep, a poorly timed comment, or an unexpected appearance could amplify scrutiny, invite criticism, or create legal complications. Conversely, measured, disciplined, and strategically timed actions maintain credibility, minimize risk, and reinforce the perception of control. In the high-stakes environment surrounding the Sussexes, these decisions carry both immediate and long-term consequences. And yet, despite all this coordination, one constant remains: the human element. Royals, advisors, and legal teams are navigating unprecedented territory. Every decision involves uncertainty, risk, and judgment calls. While strategy can mitigate exposure, it cannot eliminate complexity. The palace must anticipate not only actions and reactions within the family, but also media response, public interpretation, and the broader impact on institutional credibility. The cliffhanger emerges as this machinery of control begins to intersect with personal actions. Private decisions by Harry and Meghan, public perception of their narrative, and legal developments around Archewell converge in ways that cannot be fully managed. Even the most disciplined oversight cannot predict every ripple, every emotional response, every media interpretation. And that sets the stage for the next phase of the story, where personal and institutional pressures collide in unexpected ways. Meghan Markle has always been a master of narrative. From her early days as an actress to her royal transition, she cultivated an image of poise, intelligence, and control. She knew how to tell her story, shape public perception, and leverage media coverage in her favor. But suddenly, the terrain beneath her feet shifted. Legal scrutiny, institutional oversight, and whispers of marital separation created a perfect storm, one that demanded a response she could not fully script. The first challenge was legal. When lawsuits were filed and Archewell came under review, the stakes moved beyond public perception and into formal processes. No statement could undo a filing, no interview could alter a court date, and no social media post could change the procedural reality. Every move required counsel. Every public-facing action risked being misinterpreted. For someone accustomed to controlling the narrative, this shift from proactive storytelling to reactive compliance was disorienting and dangerous. But legal reality was only one dimension. Emotional and psychological pressures compounded the situation. Meghan was navigating not only institutional scrutiny, but also marital uncertainty, public judgment, and the global spotlight. The transition from control to crisis mode is rarely visible to the public, yet it is profoundly impactful. Insiders suggest that the Sussex team had to recalibrate strategy daily, balancing legal obligations, media strategy, and personal well-being. Every decision became a calculus of risk, image, and consequence. The pressure manifested in subtle ways. Appearances were meticulously managed but increasingly tense. Social media activity, once carefully curated, became less predictable. Public statements were carefully vetted, leaving little room for spontaneity or genuine expression. Every interview, every appearance, and even offhand remarks were filtered through multiple layers of scrutiny: legal advisors, communications teams, and institutional observers. The environment was one in which missteps carried disproportionate consequences. Consider the irony. Meghan, who once stepped into the public eye with confidence and autonomy, now faced constraints imposed by forces beyond her control. The very mechanisms she once used to shape her story, the press, social media, and branding, were now constrained by legal and institutional realities. Every action was reactive, every word measured, every decision strategic. Control, once a hallmark of her approach, was now conditional and fragile. The internal dynamics of Archewell added another layer of complexity. Staff members, previously motivated by vision and mission, were now navigating a heightened climate of oversight. Operational decisions, budgets, and public-facing campaigns were scrutinized more closely than ever. The foundation's ambitious projects suddenly carried additional weight, not only for their intended impact, but also as potential points of inquiry in ongoing legal and institutional reviews. Every internal decision became public in consequence, even if not in form. Meanwhile, Meghan's personal life was increasingly under the microscope. Whispers of marital separation were no longer background noise. Appearances, body language, and public interactions were analyzed for hints of tension, distance, or strategy. The convergence of personal, legal, and institutional pressures created a unique environment. One in which every choice carried multiple layers of significance, and every action, or inaction, had amplified consequences. The psychological dimension cannot be overstated. Operating in such a high-stakes environment requires constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and emotional resilience. The constant feedback loop between media interpretation, institutional expectation, and personal decisions creates a relentless pressure cooker. Insiders suggest that the Sussex's team had to manage this complexity with extraordinary precision, balancing the human need for emotional processing with the professional need for strategic discipline. This is where crisis mode truly manifests. Crisis is not just about responding to immediate threats. It is about anticipating potential escalations, mitigating cascading effects, and preparing for outcomes that cannot yet be predicted. For Meghan, crisis mode involved aligning legal counsel, communications teams, and personal strategy while maintaining a public image of composure. The objective was not merely to survive scrutiny, but to navigate it in a way that preserved agency, credibility, and influence. There is also an element of timing to consider. Crisis management requires not only tactical response, but also strategic pacing. Statements are timed to minimize risk. Media engagement is calibrated to avoid misinterpretation, and internal actions are coordinated to align with ongoing legal and institutional processes. In this scenario, timing is not incidental, it is decisive. A poorly timed comment or appearance could compound risk exponentially, while a carefully executed move could stabilize perception and maintain credibility. And then comes the paradox. Meghan, who built her brand on authenticity and visibility, must now operate under constraints that limit both. Authentic expression must be filtered, and visibility must be strategically controlled. The very qualities that once empowered her now require careful management to prevent vulnerability. Every decision embodies a tension between personal agency and external constraint, a delicate balancing act that few in public life experience at this scale. The cliffhanger for this chapter emerges as legal, personal, and institutional pressures converge. Meghan's crisis mode is not isolated. It intersects with Harry's silence, Princess Anne's oversight, and Archewell's scrutiny. Behind every high-profile